The laughter cut deeper than any blade. The young archaeologist, Daniel Morelos, stood at the edge of the auditorium stage, his palms sweating around the worn leather folder that carried his life's work. He had spoken for 20 minutes, carefully laying out maps, soil samples, faint inscriptions copied from obscure journals. His theory was bold. Hidden beneath the suffocating jungles of the Yucatán lay an entire Mayan city that had evaded discovery for centuries. It was not a city anyone expected, not mentioned in any codex, not etched into Spanish records, but a city known only by whispers in the stones, in fragments overlooked by greater men. But when he finished, silence hung for barely a breath before it shattered into mocking chuckles. A senior professor leaned back in his seat, lips curling into a smirk. "Another dreamer," he muttered loud enough for half the hall to hear. A graduate student in the corner stifled a laugh. One archaeologist whispered to another, "Cities don't just vanish without a trace. He's chasing shadows." Daniel's heart thudded in his chest, heavy with humiliation. He had dared to believe he belonged among them, the men and women whose names filled textbooks, who were quoted in newspapers. Now, they dismissed him as a child, chasing fairy tales. Inside, his thoughts tangled. Did I push too far? Did I sound like a fool? His voice still echoed in his ears. The alignment of these ruins, when placed against the stele inscriptions, suggests a migration pattern toward an uncharted basin. He remembered the way their eyes glazed over, uninterested. They weren't listening. They had decided before he spoke that he was too young, too untested, too foolish. And yet, beneath the humiliation, a fire smoldered. Because Daniel knew something they didn't. He remembered the nights sitting with Professor Alvarez, the mentor who had believed in him when no one else would. Alvarez, frail and coughing in his final months, had pressed a notebook into Daniel's hands. Its pages were filled with hurried sketches and notes, cryptic references to the city between rivers and the stairway of shadows. Alvarez had never published these thoughts, fearing ridicule himself, but he had whispered to Daniel, "One day you must go. You will see what I could not." As Daniel stood on that stage, humiliated, those words echoed louder than the laughter. He felt the sting of their dismissal, but also the weight of a promise to a dying man who had glimpsed a truth no one else dared to speak. The moderator cleared his throat. "Thank you, Mr. Morelos. That will be all." A thin smile, polite but final, cut Daniel off. He gathered his notes, the weight of every gaze pressing against his back as he stepped down from the stage. Outside, in the cool night air, the auditorium's lights burned behind him, casting his shadow long against the pavement. He clenched the leather folder to his chest, hearing again the cruel echo of their laughter. But somewhere beneath the shame was a pulse of defiance. They don't see it because they've stopped looking, he thought. They want discoveries that fit neatly in their books. But the jungle doesn't care about their books. For a long moment, Daniel stood alone under the street lamp, his mind torn between despair and resolve. He remembered his mentor's trembling hand pressing the notebook into his own. The weight of knowledge passed like a torch. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps it was a dream, a shadow, a phantom city invented by a dying man. But what if it wasn't? In that fragile moment of humiliation, Daniel's path hardened into something unshakable. He would not let their ridicule bury his vision. If the city existed, and in his bones he knew it did, he would find it. Alone, if necessary. He lifted his eyes toward the dark horizon, imagining the thick canopy of the Yucatán, the cries of howler monkeys, the ancient stones choked by vines. Somewhere out there, hidden beneath centuries of silence, lay the answer. And Daniel vowed that one day, those who mocked him would see it with their own eyes. If you're enjoying this story of justice and hidden strength, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple act of prejudice turned into the most valuable lesson of Professor Howard's life. The auditorium behind him was fading, just as the voices of ridicule began to fade. Ahead lay the jungle, and within it the truth that would either destroy him or vindicate him forever. The night was restless. Daniel sat hunched at his small desk in his cramped apartment, the faint hum of the ceiling fan cutting through the silence. Before him lay the battered notebook, its pages yellowed and fragile, the ink faded but still alive with urgency. This notebook was no ordinary record. It was the last gift from Professor Alvarez, a man whose brilliance had often been overshadowed by frailty, whose voice quavered, but whose mind was sharp enough to see patterns others dismissed. Daniel's fingers traced the words written in hurried Spanish. La ciudad entre ríos, la escalera de sombras, the city between rivers, the stairway of shadows. The phrases had haunted him since the day Alvarez pressed the book into his hands. On some pages, Alvarez had drawn crude maps of the Yucatán Peninsula, scattered with dots and lines that seemed meaningless at first glance. But when Daniel looked closer, he saw alignments, faint connections that mirrored constellations in the night sky. Alvarez had been chasing more than a city. He was chasing the rhythm of the cosmos in stone. Daniel leaned back, rubbing his temples, the weight of humiliation from earlier still lingering. He heard again the dismissive chuckles, the mocking tone of the senior professor. He replayed every word of criticism, every smirk, every whisper. But instead of crushing him, those memories began to fuel a quiet resolve. He wasn't Alvarez. He was younger, stronger, unburdened by illness. Where his mentor's body had failed, Daniel's could endure. And yet, a shadow of doubt crept in. What if I'm just clinging to a dying man's fantasy? He thought. His chest tightened as he remembered Alvarez's frail hand on his shoulder. Promise me, Daniel, the professor had said between labored breaths. Do not let them bury the truth. One day, you will see what they refuse to. He opened the notebook again, studying a page where Alvarez had scribbled numbers and strange glyphs. Daniel whispered the words aloud, practicing the ancient Mayan pronunciation he had painstakingly taught himself. The syllables rolled awkwardly off his tongue, but the sound carried power. It was as though the very air in his apartment leaned closer, listening. A revelation struck him then, sharp as lightning. The coordinates Alvarez had circled didn't align with known ruins. They fell between two rivers whose courses had shifted slightly over centuries. Most modern maps didn't even mark the confluence anymore. But in Alvarez's time, old survey charts had captured it. Could this city between rivers have been swallowed by shifting waterways and the relentless advance of jungle? Daniel's pulse quickened. He pulled out his laptop, comparing satellite imagery with the crude sketches. At first glance, the canopy looked like an endless carpet of green. But zooming closer, he spotted irregular patterns, faint straight lines, unnatural angles where nature should have curved. His breath caught. These weren't accidents. Something was there. The thought electrified him. He rose from his chair, pacing the room, adrenaline rushing through his veins. In his mind's eye, he saw it. Great temples buried beneath roots, stairways leading into darkness, plazas once alive with the heartbeat of an ancient civilization. He whispered into the night, as if speaking to his absent mentor. You were right. My God, you were right. But reality pressed back quickly. The cost of an expedition, the danger of the jungle, the ridicule he'd face if he asked for funding again, all these obstacles loomed large. He imagined the mocking faces of the academics, smirking at the thought of Daniel trekking into the jungle with little more than a notebook and determination. And yet, deep inside, he knew this was his path. The notebook wasn't just ink on paper, it was a map of destiny. A torch passed from one soul to another. Alvarez had died without seeing the city, but Daniel would not. He closed the notebook carefully, his hand lingering on its worn cover. For the first time since the humiliating presentation, a sense of calm steadied his spirit. The laughter of his critics no longer echoed with power, it had become distant, muffled by something louder. The call of the jungle, the whisper of hidden stones beneath centuries of silence. Tomorrow, he decided, he would begin preparations. Supplies, maps, permissions, whatever it took. His path was no longer a choice. It was a promise. And as the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, Daniel swore that he would follow the secret in his notebook, no matter how deep into the shadows it led. The jungle loomed like a living wall. From the moment Daniel stepped off the rickety supply truck, the air wrapped around him in a suffocating embrace of heat and dampness. Cicadas screamed in the treetops, a sound so constant it blurred into the background, while unseen creatures rustled in the undergrowth. Every sense was assaulted. The sticky weight of humidity, the pungent smell of rotting vegetation, the hum of insects that seemed to burrow into his skin. Yet Daniel's heart pounded not with dread, but with anticipation. He adjusted the straps of his pack, heavy with gear. The worn leather notebook was sealed carefully inside, never far from his reach. It was his compass, his scripture, the voice of Alvarez guiding him through the shadows. The city between rivers, Daniel whispered to himself as he wiped sweat from his brow. He could almost feel his mentor's presence in the swaying of the trees, in the ancient silence pressing down from the canopy. His hired guide, a wiry man named Hector, eyed him skeptically. "Señor Morelos," he muttered in Spanish, "people come here with big dreams. Some don't come back. The jungle eats more men than it ever reveals secrets." His tone was flat, neither warning nor encouragement, just a statement of fact. Daniel nodded but said nothing. He had already heard enough warnings from professors, colleagues, even friends, but none of them had looked into Alvarez's notebook. None had seen the alignments or understood the cryptic sketches. To them, he was a fool chasing myths. To him, he was following a path laid out in ink and blood. The first day's march was punishing. Roots twisted beneath his boots like serpents. Thorned vines clawed at his arms. Each breath tasted of soil and damp moss. By midday, his shirt clung to his body, soaked through, and his legs burned with exhaustion. He thought of the lecture hall, the cool air, the sneering faces. A bitter smile touched his lips. Let them laugh. Let them sit in their chairs while he carved through the wilderness. That night, by the flickering glow of a campfire, Daniel unfolded the notebook once more. Hector, crouched nearby sharpening a machete, cast a glance at the pages. "What's so important in that book?" he asked. Daniel hesitated. Could he trust this man with the truth? Finally he said, "It belonged to my mentor. He believed there was a city here, a place no one else has found." Hector snorted softly. "Every archaeologist says that before they vanish. But you look different, like a man trying to prove something." Daniel's eyes lingered on the fire, watching sparks drift upward into the night. "They mocked me," he admitted quietly. "They said I was a dreamer. Maybe I am. But I'd rather chase a dream into the jungle than sit in their halls pretending to know everything." Hector studied him for a long moment before returning to his blade. "Dreamers are stubborn. Sometimes that's the only thing that wins against this place." Sleep was restless. The sounds of the jungle never ceased: the low growl of distant howler monkeys, the eerie chorus of frogs, the constant buzz of life. Daniel lay awake staring at the stars, through gaps in the canopy, feeling both insignificant and chosen. His mind replayed Alvarez's words. "One day, you will see what I could not." By dawn, they pressed deeper into the jungle. The terrain grew harsher, the air thicker. Rivers carved unexpected paths, forcing detours. Once, they stumbled upon ruins, half swallowed by vines. A crumbling stone altar, its carvings worn nearly smooth. Daniel's pulse raced. It was not the city he sought, but it was proof that even here, civilization had once carved meaning into stone. He ran his fingers across the faint glyphs, whispering the Mayan words under his breath. For a moment, he felt a strange connection, as if the stones themselves had been waiting for him. Hector watched warily, muttering something about spirits best left alone. The days stretched on, each one testing his resolve. But every hardship only fed his determination. The jungle, with all its dangers, seemed to ask him a question. Are you worthy to find what lies hidden? And each step Daniel took was his answer. By the end of the third week, He no longer felt mocked by the memory of the auditorium. He felt sharpened, tempered like steel in fire. The city was out there, somewhere beneath the choking vines and roots, and Daniel Morelos would not leave until he found it. By the fourth week, Daniel's body had become part of the jungle's rhythm. His skin was streaked with insect bites, his boots mud-caked and fraying at the seams, but his senses had sharpened. Every sound, every shift in the air seemed to whisper clues. He no longer recoiled at the shriek of monkeys or the hiss of unseen snakes. They were part of the orchestra that surrounded him. What he listened for now was silence. Because silence, in this endless chorus, often meant something was different. And one humid morning, silence came. Hector stopped, mid-step, raising a hand. The cicadas had stilled, leaving only the muffled drip of moisture from the canopy above. Daniel pushed aside a curtain of leaves, his heart quickening. Before him stretched a rise in the earth, an unnatural mound draped in moss and roots. It wasn't a hill. Its angles were too precise, its slope too even. Daniel dropped to his knees, brushing away the tangled undergrowth. His fingers met cold stone. The surface was etched faintly with lines, nearly erased by centuries of erosion. "Carvings," he whispered, his voice trembling with awe. Hector crouched beside him, skeptical but curious. "Could be a natural rock." "No," Daniel said firmly, tracing the lines. "This is cut, deliberate. Look the glyphs." He pulled his notebook, flipping to a page where Alvarez had drawn crude sketches. The resemblance was undeniable. The same shapes, the same mysterious stair-like patterns. The revelation hit Daniel like a thunderclap. He wasn't chasing illusions. Here, hidden beneath centuries of jungle, lay the first proof of something greater. But it wasn't only carvings. As they cleared further, Daniel noticed the ground formed a pattern. Large, squared stones, barely visible beneath roots. The soil shifted strangely underfoot, as if hollow spaces lurked below. And then, a few paces away, he found it. A stone slab half buried in the earth, tilted like the edge of a stair. His breath caught. A stairway. Alvarez's stairway of shadows. That night, Daniel sat by the fire, staring into the pages of the notebook. His mind was alight with revelation. He thought of Alvarez, the old man coughing into a handkerchief, whispering, "One day, you will see what they refuse to." Daniel's eyes burned, not from smoke, but from the surge of emotion. He was seeing it now. The city wasn't just a dream, it was here, whispering through stone and soil. But joy was tempered by unease. Hector had grown restless, his eyes darting toward the jungle shadows more often. "Señor Morelos," he said cautiously, "sometimes ruins are left buried for a reason. Spirits, curses, they are not just stories here." Daniel met his gaze, steady. Spirits or not, these stones tell a story, and stories must be uncovered. Later, when Hector had fallen into uneasy sleep, Daniel remained awake, the firelight flickering across the pages of the notebook. He thought of the professors, of their laughter, of the dismissive sneers. He imagined their faces when he stood before them again, not with sketches or theories, but with undeniable proof-carved stone, a stairway into the earth. Yet doubt whispered at the edges of his resolve. What if these were just fragments, not a city? What if Alvarez had been wrong after all? Daniel's fists clenched. The carvings, the mound, the stairs, they aligned too perfectly with Alvarez's notes. This was only the beginning. The next day, they pushed deeper around the mound. The jungle resisted, its vines pulling like hands desperate to conceal what lay beneath. But each layer of soil removed revealed more. Blocks stacked with purpose, glyphs weathered but intact. Daniel felt as though the earth itself was slowly confessing a secret. At one point, he pressed his ear to the stone and swore he felt a faint echo, the suggestion of hollow chambers below. His heart surged. The city breathes beneath us. By dusk, he stood atop the mound, surveying the canopy that stretched in every direction. The jungle swallowed him, endless and overwhelming. But beneath his boots, hidden by centuries of silence, was proof of something vast. And for the first time, Daniel allowed himself a smile. The mockery of the auditorium no longer mattered. He was closer than anyone had ever been. He could almost hear Alvarez whisper, "You have found the door. Now will you have the courage to open it?" The discovery should have been triumph enough, but triumph has a way of drawing predators. Daniel had sent word to a few colleagues before leaving, desperate for credibility, for someone to take his expedition seriously. Among those who received his message was Dr. Marcus Hale, a fellow archaeologist with an enviable reputation and an ego to match. Hale had always treated Daniel as a bothersome insect, swatting away his questions in seminars, mocking his youth and enthusiasm, and now Hale arrived at Daniel's camp with a grin that did not reach his eyes. "Morelos," he said, stepping from the brush with 2 assistants trailing behind him. "Imagine my surprise, finding you out here. Chasing fairy tales, are we?" Daniel's chest tightened. He had not invited Hale. He had merely mentioned coordinates in a frustrated letter weeks ago, never expecting him to appear. But here he was, polished boots barely muddied, arms crossed with smug assurance. "I've found carvings," Daniel said carefully. "Stone alignments. Stairways. It's real, Marcus." Hale chuckled. "Stone in the jungle? You're describing half of Mexico." "You're too eager, Daniel. You mistake erosion for architecture, shadows for stairways. I suppose youth gives you optimism, but scholarship demands proof." Daniel's jaw clenched. He remembered the laughter of the auditorium, the weight of humiliation. Now that same mockery stood before him in flesh. "I don't mistake," Daniel said. "Come see for yourself." They walked to the mound, where Daniel had cleared a portion of the stone steps. Hale crouched, running his fingers across the glyphs. For a moment his expression faltered, but quickly he masked it with a shrug. "Weathering. Coincidence. You see what you want to see." Daniel's temper burned, but beneath his fury was fear. If Hale dismissed this, if he used his influence to discredit it, Daniel's discovery would die before it was even born. That night, Daniel overheard Hale whispering with his assistants, "If there's anything here, we'll claim it. He's just a boy with a notebook. No one will believe him without us. We'll publish, take the credit, and leave him forgotten." The words struck like a blade. Daniel lay awake in his hammock, staring at the stars through the canopy, rage and despair twisting within him. Is this how it ends? I find the city, only to have it stolen? His thoughts turned inward, desperate. Why did I trust anyone? Why did I think they'd see me differently this time? His mind echoed with Alvarez's voice, softer now, almost pleading. "Do not let them bury the truth." By dawn, Daniel had made his decision. If Hale wanted to play games, so be it. Daniel would work faster, dig deeper, push himself beyond exhaustion if necessary. He would unearth something undeniable, something even Hale could not dismiss. The days that followed became a battle. Hale shadowed him, criticizing, downplaying, occasionally accidentally disturbing cleared sites. Tools went missing. Food supplies dwindled suspiciously. Hector muttered that Hale's men were sabotaging them. But Daniel pressed on. One evening, Daniel confronted Hale directly. "You can't stop this," he said, voice low with fury. "This city exists. Every stone we pull free proves it." Hale's smirk widened. "Then you'd better pray you're the one standing on those stones when the world comes looking. Because history doesn't remember who believed. It remembers who published first." The words twisted in Daniel's chest, but instead of breaking him, they hardened his resolve. He turned back to the mound, back to the stubborn vines and heavy earth. He would dig until his hands bled, until the stairway revealed its secrets. Because beyond Hale's arrogance, beyond the petty games of academia, something greater called to him from beneath the soil. The city was there. He felt it in every vibration of stone, in every glyph that whispered from the shadows. And no betrayal, no rival, no thief of glory could silence that truth. The ground trembled faintly under Daniel's boots, as though the earth itself was exhaling after centuries of silence. For days, he and Hector had labored at the mound, sweat streaming down their backs, hands raw from prying at stubborn roots. Hale and his men lingered nearby, always watching, always scoffing. But on the 12th morning, something shifted, literally. Hector swung his machete into a mass of roots that clung to a stone slab. With a groan like bones breaking, the roots tore free, exposing a section of staircase that plunged downward into the earth. The air that rushed out was stale, cold, untouched by sunlight for centuries. Daniel's heart thundered. The stairway of shadows. Alvarez's words burned in his mind. He knelt, brushing away soil. Glyphs etched into the stone emerged: spirals, jaguars, celestial alignments. They were too precise, too deliberate to be coincidence. His chest tightened with awe. "It's real," he whispered, voice trembling. "It's all real." Hale strode forward, his expression carefully blank. "A few steps don't make a city," he muttered, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. His assistants exchanged uncertain glances. Daniel placed both hands on the exposed stairway, closing his eyes. In that moment, he wasn't in the jungle. He was standing beside Alvarez again, hearing his rasping breath, feeling the frail hand pressing the notebook into his own. "Promise me, Daniel. Promise you'll see it." Tears stung his eyes. "I've kept the promise," he whispered. They cleared more earth, revealing a wall beneath the canopy. Carved stones stacked with purpose, their mortar still holding. The jungle had tried to reclaim them, but the architecture was undeniable. With each stone exposed, the weight of mockery that had haunted Daniel began to crumble. He no longer heard Hale's laughter or the professor's dismissal. He heard only the voice of the stones, rumbling with truth. That night, Daniel sat by the fire, staring at the freshly unearthed stairway gleaming pale in the moonlight. Sleep eluded him. His mind raced with visions, plazas filled with dancers, priests marking the heavens, children laughing in courtyards. He saw the city alive again, as if it had never been lost. Hector leaned closer. "Señor Morelos," he said quietly, "I have guided many men, but never have I seen stones breathe like this. The city, it wants to be found." Daniel's throat tightened. "And it will be, no matter who tries to bury it again." His eyes flicked toward Hale's tent, where muffled whispers and the glow of lanterns betrayed scheming. The next day brought revelation and danger. As Daniel dug, his hand struck a hollow sound. He froze, then cleared away more soil until a stone door emerged, its surface sealed shut with hardened clay. A carved serpent stretched across its face, its eyes made of jade that still glinted green after centuries. Daniel's heart pounded. He pressed his palm against the serpent. The stone was cool, almost alive. Behind it, chambers waited, chambers that could contain murals, artifacts, codices, even bones. Proof undeniable. Hale approached, his voice dripping with false casualness. A sealed chamber, dangerous, could collapse, perhaps best left untouched until proper authorities arrive. Daniel turned slowly, meeting his gaze. For the first time, Hale faltered under the steel in Daniel's eyes. "I didn't come this far to wait for permission," Daniel said. "If the city wants to speak, I'll be the one to hear it first." The earth seemed to pulse beneath them, as though answering his vow. By dusk, they had pried the serpent door slightly open. A rush of ancient air spilled out, carrying the smell of dust and incense long extinguished. Daniel's chest constricted, awe threatening to overwhelm him. He was standing on the threshold of history. The earth had trembled with truth, and tomorrow the world would tremble with it too. When the chamber finally yawned open, the world itself seemed to pause. Daniel pushed his way inside, lantern in hand, the flame flickering against walls that had not known light in 1,000 years. The air was dense, heavy with the smell of ancient incense and limestone dust. His boots scuffed across the stone floor, and when the glow spread further, his breath caught. Murals exploded across the walls, jaguars leaping among constellations, priests kneeling before a blazing sun, stairways rising into heavens painted in deep reds and blacks that still pulsed with color despite the centuries. Glyphs told stories of dynasties lost to time, but it was not merely art. It was history rewritten, voices of ancestors breaking their silence. Daniel's hands trembled as he sketched furiously, as he whispered the glyphs aloud in halting Mayan, piecing together fragments. His mentor's words echoed in his skull. The city between rivers, the stairway of shadows. Here it was, carved into the walls themselves, a testament Alvarez had not lived to see. Behind him, Hector gasped, "Señor Morelos, look." In the center of the chamber stood a pedestal draped in dust. Resting upon it was a jade mask, its features sharp, regal, alive with a cold green glow. Daniel approached reverently, as if afraid his presence might shatter the illusion. This was no trinket, no minor artifact. It was royal. It spoke of kings and ceremonies, of a city that had thrived in secrecy. But before Daniel could speak, Hale's voice slithered from behind. "Incredible," he murmured, stepping into the chamber with calculated calm. His eyes devoured the murals, the mask, the stones. "You've done well, Morelos. But history will remember who reveals it, not who finds it." Daniel turned, rage and fear battling within him. "You wouldn't dare." "Oh, I would," Hale smirked. "The world trusts me. They'll believe my word over yours. A boy chasing fantasies versus a respected scholar. Which version do you think museums will embrace?" The words twisted like a knife. But before Daniel could answer, Hector barked, "Number, this belongs to the earth and to those who respected it." And it was he gestured to Daniel, who bled for it. Hale's smirk faltered, but only for a moment. He drew himself tall. "Romantics. You think discovery is about passion? It's about power. I'll have this chamber sealed and documented under my name." But fate has a way of silencing arrogance. Outside, a storm had been gathering, and as thunder cracked, the ground shuddered violently. Dust rained from the ceiling, stones groaning, as if the city itself rejected Hale's claim. Daniel grabbed Hector's arm, dragging him toward the doorway as cracks split across the mural. Hale froze, staring at the jade mask, torn between greed and survival. Daniel shouted, "Leave it! The world will know, even without artifacts in your pocket." But Hale's hands stretched toward the mask anyway. The tremor surged. A section of the ceiling collapsed, and with a scream, Hale was thrown back, pinned beneath falling stones. His assistants fled, terror etched on their faces. Dust clouded the chamber, choking, suffocating. Daniel staggered into the open air, coughing, his lungs burning. Hector steadied him. Together, they watched as the mound trembled, then stilled, the serpent door half buried again under rubble. The mask, the murals, the chamber still there, but sealed by the wrath of time. News spread quickly once Daniel returned to civilization, with sketches, photos, and samples. Images of glyphs and stone stairways flashed across screens worldwide. Headlines roared, "Lost Mayan City Unearthed. Young Archaeologist Vindicated." Scholars who had laughed now scrambled to align themselves with him. The same auditorium that once mocked him now invited him back, eager to hear every detail. Daniel stood before them again, but this time the silence that followed his words was not ridicule. It was awe. Professors who once sneered now scribbled notes in frantic reverence. The boy they dismissed as a dreamer had shown them the truth, and for a fleeting moment, Daniel closed his eyes, hearing Alvarez's voice above the applause. "You will see what I could not." Weeks had passed, but Daniel still woke each morning with the jungle in his lungs, the smell of damp earth, the hiss of cicadas, the tremor of stone shifting under his touch. Civilization had welcomed him back with open arms, yet he carried the weight of the city with him, as if part of his soul had been left beneath the serpent door. The world now called him the Discoverer. Museums clamored for lectures, journalists begged for interviews, and scholars who once mocked him lined up to praise his brilliance. Daniel accepted their words with a measured smile, but inside, he remembered the laughter, the ridicule that had burned him hollow in that auditorium. He remembered Hale's sneer, his hand reaching greedily for the jade mask before the city itself rejected him. In the months since, the site had been officially recognized and guarded. Excavations began under strict supervision. And though Hale survived, carried out broken, his reputation shattered. It was Daniel's name etched into history's ledger. Hale's arrogance had buried him beneath rubble, both literal and academic. Daniel felt no triumph in it, only a solemn clarity. Arrogance builds its own tomb. One afternoon, Daniel returned to the site. Standing atop the mound, now cleared and marked with flags, he felt a hush fall over him. Workers paused in the distance, their voices faint. He descended slowly, touching the exposed stones with reverence. The stairway lay open again, leading into shadow. He knelt, pulling Alvarez's notebook from his pack. Its pages were worn, edges curling, ink smudged yet still alive with urgency. Daniel whispered softly, "We did it, Professor. You saw the door. I opened it." His throat tightened, and for a moment, he closed his eyes, imagining Alvarez's frail smile, his trembling voice whispering, "Promise me." When Daniel rose, he no longer carried only the weight of vindication. He carried a legacy not of triumph over rivals, but of humility before truth. The city had not been his to claim. It had been waiting, buried in silence, until someone was stubborn or foolish enough to listen. He had been mocked for that stubbornness, but in the end, it was the very quality that unearthed the stones. As he prepared to leave, Hector joined him, gazing at the stairway. "You have changed, Señor Morelos," he said quietly. "When you first came, you were fighting for pride. Now, you listen to the stones." Daniel smiled faintly. "The stones are wiser than men. They don't laugh. They don't mock. They only wait." That evening, under the setting sun, Daniel penned the final words in Alvarez's notebook. "The city belongs not to me, nor to scholars, nor to glory. It belongs to time, and to those who walk humbly enough to uncover its voice." Back in the city, during his final lecture of the season, Daniel stood before yet another crowded hall. His voice was steady, his gaze calm. "Discovery," he told them, "is not about proving others wrong. It is about proving the truth right, and truth will always find its way, no matter how deeply buried." The audience rose in applause, a sound like thunder. But Daniel barely heard them. He was listening inward, to the quiet heartbeat of the jungle, to the stones whispering beneath centuries of silence. He ended with words that carried beyond the walls. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel to discover more stories about how extraordinary people turn humiliation into triumph. And as he left the stage, Daniel felt no need for vindication. The city had spoken, and that was enough. Moral: true discovery demands humility, patience, and the courage to endure ridicule. Arrogance may shout, but history listens to those who kneel beside the stones and hear their quiet truths.